Hi, I am from outer space. I've got Milky Way for blood, evolution in my veins. I'm gone. I've been far away. I'm a luminaire now, making moves, starting waves. I've been dreaming about flying for a long time. I had a vision from the Greys. They want a cosign. Artificially intelligent, new AI. I'm your future, past and present. I'm the fine line. I'm a missing link from this illusion. I'm not really here, I'm an intrusion. I don't swim or sink, I just float. I don't need gravity, I just need growth. When I move, it's an earthquake rumble. I will never, ever fall, never stumble. And I don't need to be humble. Break down walls, like Jericho crumble. I can go higher. Past the stratosphere, I can catch fire. I can go hard. I don't even need to try. Yeah, I'm starblood. I don't ever get tired. Predestined, written in stone. I feel it coming in, I feel it in my bones. Heavily protected, never alone. Trapped in, I'm connected to the unknown. When I move, it's an earthquake rumble. I will never ever fall, never stumble. And I don't need to be humble. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024, 2:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Here with us today, we've got Captive Dave Desk, Tux TV, YouTube Punk, Chris Moore. Great to have you guys here with us today. Now, I wrote a blog today, a reply to somebody that said something to me on the interwebs, usually how these things start. It's frustrating for me because every time I engage with a religious fundamentalist, an apologist, an evangelizer, I know that I'm accidentally or unavoidably feeding a narrative, a culture war that they perceive the outside world is waging upon them. Us versus the atheists, us versus the liberals, us versus the humanists, us versus the pagans. Always us versus them. Coming at it from that perspective, no matter what I say to these people, it's going to be understood in that context. So I'm sabotaged from the start before I ever say a word. And to be honest, I'm not at peace with it at all. It's quite unfortunate. The perception, the narrative illusion that these people have been fed is that they're just minding their own business and the world is assaulting them from every direction. It's out to get them, lying in the power of some wicked adversary with superpowers. The forces of good and evil battling with them caught in the middle. I understand the narrative. I used to be caught up in that narrative. It's frustrating because if I ignore it, well, then they just go unchecked. In spaces where they shouldn't have been pushing their religion in the first place. I don't go to them. I don't rent billboards. I don't stand on street corners with bullhorns. I don't private message people that I see are religious to let them know that they're wrong in some way. I don't picket outside of their gatherings. I don't go into their churches to challenge their beliefs. In my own spaces, I host conversations. In public spaces where they make the challenge, I sometimes meet the challenge. The greater truth that they've been lied to about isn't about God necessarily, though that too. It's this idea that they are separate from the world, that they are an autonomous, special collective, and that everyone else is out to get them or untrustworthy or lesser in some way. This idea, this narrative that disconnects them from other people around them, friends, family, neighbors, community, the larger whole of humanity, and even the rest of the animal kingdom. This is one of the reasons why I love the Native American spiritual narrative so much, because they're not divisive, or at least the ones that we're familiar with, the popular idea of those spiritual narratives. This idea that everything and everyone is sacred, that we are all one part of a larger living, breathing whole, a whole that cannot be separated into its parts. a whole where everything has purpose and function and beauty. And if you can't see it, then the problem lies with you. If you can't feel it, the same applies. Who else do we have in here today? We have Brojo, Gen X, the BS says hi. James Epperson, hi all. Great to have you here with us, Brojo. So I wrote a reply on this blog. I'm going to go over it really quick. It's frustrating for me because we see it all the time. The reason why a lot of people in the so-called atheist community, and I hate the word atheist and I hate the word community. I have a problem with both of those words. Do I want to get into that? Probably not too deeply, no. You know, the word atheist depends on a definition for the word theist. The word theist depends on a definition for the word God. And the word God, as Carl Sagan pointed out, means pretty much whatever you want it to mean. It's social lubricant. It is a word meant to create an illusion between people interacting socially, that somehow you share a common idea or a common narrative of identity, but you don't. Right? If you say the word God in front of a whole bunch of people that like the word, they may all smile, they may all clap and cheer and say amen. But in that crowd could be a Muslim and a Jehovah's Witness and a Catholic and a pantheist and a stoicist, right? All kinds of different ideas about what the word God means. Even Spinoza's God, a very different idea. So when the word God means pretty much just whatever the speaker wants it to mean, then the word theist can't be really meaningful, and then neither can the word atheist. I also don't like the polemic that's generally inferred by the term. Now, I understand that there is some practical benefit to saying, you know what, over there in the human social systems, there's this domain of thought, this narrative or this narrative premise where people submit themselves to a larger than life authority figure. Most of the people that identify as theists do this. So then atheist is a way to say, I'm not over there. I'm not part of that phenomenon socially. And that's fine. It's a shortcut kind of a word. That's what language does. But I'm not really comfortable with it because one of my main objections to Christianity and Islam and other religions like that is that they set us apart from each other. And if my goal, if my interest is to say, we're all one, and we need to embrace that and see the beauty and the truth and the functional necessity of that for our continued existence as a species, then the last thing I want to do is put forth a polemic where there's these billions and billions of people that I speak to and that I speak about as enemies. As I see it, religions declared enemyship on everyone outside of their circles. The larger world of humanity did not declare war on Christianity, not on a global scale. There were times, very small scopes of time and very small scopes of space where some leaders and some people, for very brief periods in a larger span of time, have declared war on religions, including Christianity. There are some places in the world right here, right now, other countries, where that's happening too. And China's war on a very specific faction of Islam, for example, though to a lesser extent, the larger realm of Islam. They've got concentration camps and they're just destroying lives. And the world's hardly paying attention to it. Everybody's so focused on Ukraine versus Russia and Israel versus Palestinians or Gaza. That really we're just like turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to what's going on over in China. There are places where not necessarily religious governments or institutions or societies effectively wage war on specific religious groups, and sometimes that focuses on Christians. Sometimes in some places, just not usually, not from the start, and not in most places, not in most spaces, but sometimes. My views on that are complex, and I don't want to point fingers and play the blame game on that. But my point is that I'm not really at peace with the idea of pushing polemics to treat or speak of Christians as the enemy. They do. Most of them do. Fundamentalists do, right? Us against, quote unquote, the world. The world is an expression within that domain that drips with judgment. I don't like it. I'm not at peace with it at all. And I see people in the secular community, what some people call the atheist community, that keep coming back to channels that have quote unquote atheist content. Most of those people are trying to heal. They are wounded and they are frustrated and they are disconnected from the people that they love because they have deconverted accidentally from a religious domain, usually some version of Christianity here in the West, though it also happens with Islam, right? Somebody eventually realizes that the religious narratives that they've been fed aren't true and aren't healthy, right? The reason why the phrase crisis of faith exists is because it is a crisis for people when they begin to lose their faith. They're not trying to, there's no spirit of rebellion. They're not mad at God, right? They're just going about their lives, singing the songs and saying the words and the prayers and everything else. And then one day something occurs to them. This thought, this idea, this troubling concern. And they do research to try to alleviate that concern. They go to their preachers and their pastors and their congregation and their family. This thing is bothering me, and I don't know how to make it come right. It seems, just seems, like something's wrong here. Please help me understand this. And what happens in the end is they realize that the religion that they've been raised in, the religion of their parents and their friends, their family, the community, isn't as well thought out as they thought. It's not as morally defensible, as logically defensible, as factually accurate as they imagined it were. They begin to deconvert, and there's that crisis period where they don't want to deconvert. Their ability to maintain a certain kind of relationship, mutually respectful, deeply invested, casual and pretty relationship with friends and with family depends quite often on their ability to maintain an identity and a belief within a religious culture and narrative. And they know that if they lose that, it is going to hurt the relationship with their religious friends and family and community. They might not get shunned. They might not get disfellowshipped. It depends on the faction. But even if they don't, there's going to be this demotion. There's going to be this consequence where the people that they love lose some respect and begin to see them in such a way where they're somehow spiritually sick and wayward and broken, in need of repair, in need of rescue, in need of remedy, right? Potentially even dangerous if they continue to harbor ideas which are antithetical to the narrative. It is an incredibly tumultuous time in somebody's life when they accidentally begin to deconvert despite desperately wanting to believe in a particular set of ideas. Got Nerdy Rodent in here with us today, and I'm scrolling back up to see what else I've missed. Chris Moore says they act like they own the table. God, says YouTube Punk. Me too, James. Odd man out, right? So I think that was in regards to the community thing and where we fit within it. YouTube Punk says, remember, Yahweh saw people united and it threatened him to the point that he invented new languages. So this is a reference to the story of the Tower of Babel. Oh, dang, I gone, done, and lost it, says Nerdy Rodent. YouTube Punk says, Jesus helped them find their keys, but not their faith. Right, this is an issue too. Scrolling back down. We need more James, says Nerdy Rodent. I appreciate that. I haven't been streaming a whole lot lately. One of the reasons I haven't been streaming a lot lately is because I've been trying to figure out what my purpose is, what my focus is. Why am I streaming? What is it for me and what is it for anyone else? Now, each individual has to answer that for themselves, same as they would for any other channel or any other media that they engage with. And I'm not specifically asking if somebody wants to volunteer if they can, but my point is, I no longer believe in community in the same way that I used to. I believe in it as an idea. I want it as a phenomenon that I can be involved with. But I have to say that people can be quite troubled and troubling. It's not just inside of Christian circles or Christian churches or Islamic, what do they got, mosques or temples, whatever they have, that people can be really troubled, right? The same thing happens in secular communities or societies or social niches, right? I'm always feeling like I'm the odd man out, too. I always feel like I'm on the outside looking in. I don't feel as connected to the people as I want to. I don't feel like we're as much on the same part of our journey as I would like to imagine, which is okay. We can all be in a different place in our lives. I'm okay with that. But there's a deeper sense of connection and cohesion that I was really hoping to find that wasn't quite there. There's just only so much cohesion and connection you can build with the idea that we're not part of some other group, right? We disagree with this collective over here. We think there are problems in it. We think there are ideological problems, factual problems, historical problems, ethical problems. We can talk about that and how it's affected our lives. We can bond and connect and understand each other within that context. But there's a limit to how socially bonding that framework can be. There is no substitute to breaking bread with someone, to singing with them, to dancing with them, laughing and crying with them. There's just only so much connection and cohesion and really getting to know who the other person is that you can have through channels like these. Even the bigger channels, smaller channels, same thing. There's a limit that you can do with them. Now, during the COVID era, I withdrew very much so. And I know that if there's any conservative-minded people here, they're already rolling their eyes because of the great COVID hoax, right? Whatever. My son has, who I live with, or he lives with me, has a very serious heart condition. I have some risk factors as well. And I wasn't going to take big risks with our health, considering the news broadcast that I was seeing and the death tolls that I was seeing. And now that COVID's behind us, as much as it's going to be at least, I have to ask myself, what am I going to do to resolve this? Who's going to be my people? Where am I going to find those at? Now, I do agree with most atheists when in the context of talking about religion, the points that they make or the arguments or any of the objections that they make, whether they be ethical or logical, usually we're right on the same page about it. Not always, but usually. But at the same time, I must admit I found myself drawn more towards spiritual persons. Not because I'm rejecting atheists. I'm certainly not judging them either. I'm not even necessarily disagreeing with them on logical foundations. But when I think about communities or what's left of Native American spiritual communities, when I see those represented in cinema, when I read about their stories through books, I have a sense of draw towards those ways of being in the world that secular, rational skepticism just doesn't provide for. I don't feel the same sense of those are my people as I do with spiritual-minded people. A big part of the problem is that most of us come from a Christian society and Christian families, some of us from Islamic. And because of those experiences, we have this distaste for the word spiritual. Because our mind associates the word with other concepts that we've found troubling and destructive. Reasonably so, because that's the way the brain processes language, is the way the brain stores language, by association. All concepts are stored by association. So it makes sense to me when an atheist cringes or eye rolls or face palms or outward rejects the idea of spirituality being legitimate. And if we define spirituality in the context or the same way that a fundamentalist would, I would agree. If we're defining spirituality the way that Christian evangelicals define it, I'm right there with you. Flush it down the toilet, in my opinion. But if we define it in a different context, where it is a sense of connection that we have as being part of a living, breathing, larger whole, that we find empowerment in that idea, clarity in who we are within the context, not to where we lose our self or identity, but where we also understand that our individual identity and autonomy and journey is still connected to, intrinsically part of a larger phenomenon, a larger living, breathing reality. And we get clarification from that. We get empowerment from that. We get an appreciation for a really deep sense of connection to everyone and everything through that. That's what I call spirituality. And I think that there's not enough focus on that, not enough appreciation for that in atheist circles, because we're always so busy talking about how unreasonable and sometimes destructive religious ideas are that we're here to talk about. There's value in that, but I think that it's okay to move beyond that, beyond the things that we're not okay with, beyond the things that we're making reasonable objections to talk about the things that we have in common, to talk about the things that give our life beauty and meaning and connection. Scrolling back down, let me see what else we've got here. Scott Duke says, maybe when we conceptualize community, we need to also conceptualize how we deal with brokenness in that community, right? It's difficult for me because if a specific event happens and I want to use it as an example, I can't. Because if I use it as an example, either directly or simply by implication, because I'm raising the issue at the same time, people are going to know. Like if there's a current drama in the network, and then I use that as the foundation or catalyst for addressing the issue, people are going to know what I'm talking about. They're going to know that I'm thinking about or responding to that drama, which is going to make the people involved with that drama feel called out, right? And I'm not looking to do that. So it's difficult, but I've seen a lot of things that are part of what we might call the atheist community that I don't like at all. Gatekeeping, purity culture, us versus them, gossip, forming cliques, things like that. There's a lot of unhealthy things that happen in the network, but most of us stay so distracted with railing against the machine of religion, raging against that machine, that we don't pay enough attention to what's going on in their own network and how we could address and evolve and grow beyond those. James didn't have the blood of Jesus vaccine, right? YouTube punk. Scott Duke says, like, when we conceptualize, we also tend to idealize, and that's the problem with our disillusionment. Wow, that's deep. I like it a lot, Scott Duke. When we conceptualize, we also tend to idealize, right? And that's a problem with our delusionment. So this is a thing that seems to be more of a problem for people on the left of the political spectrum. This idealizing things. Sometimes it gets so easy. We get so easily caught up in these ideas of what humanity could be, what form society could take. You know, the Star Trek Gene Roddenberry kind of thinking, that it causes us to be kind of unrealistic moving forward about how we have discussions and what we're doing to try to shape society in that direction. And it can be problematic to idealize things in a certain way. We end up with these absolutes, right, about how society ought to be. And if we get angry enough about it with enough people, it creates a polemic where we have not enough tolerance for people that think and feel differently than that, or people that want to progress slower than that. Captive Dave Desk says, I stayed home, spent the check they sent us, and expanded my pond during COVID. Absolutely. Any of my idealized conceptualizations are quite obviously correct because I came up with them, says Nerdy Rodent. Fair. Chris Moore says, to me, it's hard to be the soft-spoken atheist. Theists expect me to be when the whole modus operandi of apologetics do by engaging in bad faith, right? And I'm going to talk about that here in the blog that I think I'm going to read in a moment. BS, you dropped that Jim Bob video pretty quick. Were you working on it before POC? Scrolling back down. Agreed, James. Why I resonate with natural pantheist Taoism ideas. Oh, that's awesome, bro, Joe. That really is. I'd like to hear other people saying that they can kind of get me on that. I don't expect a whole lot of agreement with those spirituality points in this particular community. I understand why, right? Or in this social ecosystem. I understand why I'm not going to get a whole lot of positive feedback about that, but I appreciate when I get it. Hank Oflamio says, excellent. It looks like I'm having an impact, right? So Hank has been over there sometimes at Mike's channel, Answers in Atheism. I don't know. I did find myself already agreeing with a lot of what Hank said. Now, Hank uses language differently than some people in the network. For example, Leo, right? Leo is brilliant and he's powerful and he's still young. I can only imagine how far he's going to go in this world. But he's plugged into a subcultural niche of what Mike over in Answers and Atheism calls philosophenies, right? They use language in a very, very rigid kind of way. And because of that, they don't have a whole lot of allowance for discussions that use language differently than that. But I agree with Hanko Flamio. In fact, this is the reason why sometimes I refer to myself as a vicarious theist. Because really at the heart of it, when somebody says that they have a God or they worship a God, the word God is a crown of words. It's an expression of awe. It is an expression of being humbled at the conceptual feat of something that's so much larger than ourselves. That not only what must we look up to it, but that it identifies or contextualizes our existence in such a way where it puts it into a certain kind of perspective or framework, where we're down here, they're up there, and we're trying to structure who we are in the world in relationship to that paradigm. So, if somebody says that they worship, or if somebody simply does worship a human being, if that human being exists, then their God exists in the context of they worship the person, right? That's a God to them. Now, it's not a God to me, right? So I don't have that relationship to the worshiped person. Therefore, even though the person exists, they're not my God. They're that other person's God, right? And that other person gets to define God how they want to. What is it about the worshiped person that makes the worshiping person feel so humbled at their conceptualized feat? And this can include things that are real and things that are imagined, sure. But that's what it means. God is a relationship paradigm where it helps a person contextualize who they are and where they feel a reverent regard, a sense of awe, whether it's a negative awe or more likely a positive sense of awe. Because worship at the end of the day really just means a special regard, right? An extra special regard for something or someone. And those things exist. So I'm not going to say no gods exist. What I would say instead is that because I'm so jaded, because I'm so cynical, and maybe because I'm rational, although I don't think that's even a big part of it, there's nothing about this universe I'm impressed enough with, right? If someone were to convince me that this universe must have had an intelligent prime mover, a grand designer and creator, even if they convinced me of that, I wouldn't be a theist because I wouldn't feel that enamored with the idea of it, right? This individual or these individuals, I wouldn't feel that enamored. I'd look around at the universe and I'd say, really, you couldn't do better than this? Really, you couldn't do better than this? Right? And the moment you say that, then they're not your God, period. Even if you think they created the universe, they're not your God. And so for as long as I remain that jaded, not cynical, I'll never have a God, even if the universe had a creator, or if someone eventually convinces me that it did. So that's what the words mean to me. Yeah, I don't really engage with the Jim Bob thing. No, I jumped into Mike's channel the other day, and this like second or third time where they were talking about Jim Bob where I jumped in. But I had almost nothing to say about it. I'm not a follower of Jim Bob's content. I've seen pieces of it. To me, he just comes across as somebody who's hurting, a little bit angry, a little bit unresolved, and looking for someone and something to rail against. And I can relate to that. Really, I can. And I just don't think it's productive on either side of that exchange. I don't think there's anything good that could come out of it. So, on a spiritual journey, good for you, man, says Chris Moore. I appreciate that, Chris Moore. I really do. So, this is the reason why I started this stream quoting from the song from Iniko. And she has somebody created a brilliant, what do you call that? Where they mix two things. So they mixed Michael Jackson's They Don't Care About Us with the song slash poem from about Jericho, and most of you guys have probably heard it. And it's brilliant and it's wonderful and I love it. And this is why I started quoting from it, because there is a great mystery. And I don't think that we can realistically expect to identify it and solve it and explore it within the context of science as a tool. Now, I don't believe in the supernatural. Supernatural, to me, is a nonsense word. It tells us what something isn't, not natural, but it doesn't tell us what something is. It's not useful to me at all. One of the things that I learned from various religious historians over at MythVision is that originally the people that are in the Bible cultures, the original Hebrews and the earliest Christians, they didn't have anything like the supernatural. Modern religious people read supernatural into the texts, but it wasn't there. God was a physical entity. His power was physical. His spirit was physical. It was the wind, and in the way that it filled our lungs, it was the life. The Spirit of God was his powerful, dynamic energy. He breathed a wind. That wind filled people's lungs, and it gave them life. When they die, they stopped breathing. Their final breath goes out. That is, they believed that was the last of the breath of life that was leaving the person, returning to the larger world full of wind, which is the energy or spirit of God. Now, even though that's pretty fanciful, I like the idea. I think it's beautiful to think that anybody that we've ever loved in this world, anybody that we've ever lost in this world, and right here and right now while we stand alive together in this world, that the very life force that we breathe into our lungs, that circulates through our veins, that powers our every thought and feeling, and that we breathe back out in between each next thought and feeling, is a common force of life that we all draw from and experience. So that we feel the wind, we're feeling the energy that once fueled and that is still an echo from the person that we loved. So then they're not completely gone. They fill us and they help give us life again, anew, as we not only think about them, but the wind within our lungs that fuels our body, that fuels our thoughts, was once wind that was into their body. It was once a dynamic energy that flowed through them too, even in those moments that we remember. I think that is a beautiful thought. Not everything in Bibles is ugly to me. Christianity is developed along the way and came up with supernatural as this nebulous non-concept to make it all more mysterious, but that's kind of silly in my opinion, because we don't need to make the unknown more mysterious than it is. You can't get more mysterious than being unknown. To the extent that we know it, it's not a mystery, right? There's this living, breathing reality of substance and connection, this energetic exchange between all people who are part of a larger living, breathing reality, a dynamic, constantly flowing exchange of energies. In that regard, it's not mysterious. I call it the river. I call it the mystery. I don't call it God, and for a great many reasons. Happy 420, says Brojo. Smoke community or air day? Smoke community. Yeah. I saw a stream, maybe with Hank. You said you defeated all our arguments. We don't think so. Move on. Yeah, so I guess it depends on how you use language. I probably missed part of that discussion, so I'm not going to comment on it. I got disillusioned with disillusionment, says Nerdy Rodent. That would make a wonderful T-shirt. I think I might just have that made. Coliseum 789, YouTube Punk and others, they say hi. Liked the stream because bow ties are cool, says Tux TV. Right. So if somebody wants to come on and have that discussion or any of these discussions, I welcome that. I think James is wondering, what if God was one of us? In a way, God is, right? So it depends on how we define God. There are some definitions of God that I can agree with, right? But I don't like the word because it evokes preconceived ideas in the listener, which makes it harder to have the same conversation with them. That's why I don't like the word. You, says Cameron Bennett, and Melody Joy, awesome. Or your mom says hi. Cameron Bennett says YouTube punk. Scrolling back down, I'm trying to get caught up really quick. I was just thinking about reaching out to you, Melody. Oh, yeah, well, don't let me stop you. Hank says, I agree, James. Supernatural is not a useful word for me either. Scrolling back down real quick. B.S. Lewis says, gotta practice your mama jokes. There we go. Okay, so just substitute Argon for win, says YouTube punk. Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that. All right, so I'm going to come back over here. Again, I don't want this as a polemic. I don't want it understood as a polemic, read as a polemic, felt as a polemic. It's not that. Again, my primary objection to Christianity and other fundamentalist religions or moral authoritarian religions is that they pit humans against each other. They divide us into groups and subgroups where some are due for more respect than others. And some with the in group you embrace connection and harmony, and with the out group you don't. Man, I'm just not at peace with that at all. I think it's hurting our world. So let me come back over here to I guess I could just share it. 1 second. Close that tab so I don't accidentally share the wrong one. Preset, share screen. I think this is it. Okay. Smuggling in a fictional who as a means to hijack our who. Today, our journey begins with a loaded question. Some typos exist in this blog. It's a first draft. Someone said, who or what is your master? Now, my response to that was physics. They wanted a simple answer. I gave them one. So then they asked, I don't think I captured that part of it. Then they asked, who made the universe? Who made physics? Who made physics? So in reply, I offer this. To ask who is a fallacy called begging the question. But to be fair, I don't really want to get technical and philosopho-nerdy about it. Maybe all known physics had a beginning. Nobody knows if that's the case. Maybe all the energies that this universe consists of had a true beginning. Nobody knows that either. Maybe there was a literal who that started all those things. Nobody knows that either. Maybe there were many of those who, or maybe there was only one. Nobody knows that either. According to known human history, monotheism is a later invention. Now, you can call it a discovery or a revelation if you want to. The first known monotheism was introduced by an Egyptian king as a way to consolidate power, right? Because if you have a kingdom and they have many different ideas of gods, well, the different gods are going to have different opinions about what your views and values should be and what your relationship to government should be, etc. Right? Well, you can't have such a divided kingdom if you're trying to get everybody to support controversial decisions like going to war and pillaging and plundering neighboring societies. And so they needed to be able to speak with an unquestioned moral authority. In order to do that, they needed to be able to speak from a position of, God's told me to tell you what we're supposed to do. But in order to do that and pull it off, they have to narrow it down to just one God. Otherwise, they can say, Zeus told me this thing, and somebody else can say, okay, fine, but Aphrodite told me we should make love and not war, right? So you can't have those divergent voices happening. So you need to consolidate it down to one, and then posture yourself as representing or speaking, as speaking by the authority of that one voice. This is what monotheism was created for. All later monotheisms seem to have been created for the same purpose. The biblical Hebrews' journey toward monotheism took many centuries. They started off as a tribe of Canaanites who broke away from the entirely polytheistic culture known as the Canaanites. This is why their texts are so heavily polemicized against the Canaanites. That's where they came from. When their Torah was written, borrowing concepts from older religions, they were still polytheists. And I do mean all of them. Later Bibles were altered to make that fact less obvious. However, references to other gods still remain in their texts. Yahweh was not originally a part of the Hebrew religious lore. He took many centuries to develop. To build Yahweh, they scavenged parts from metaphorically dead and buried gods. If we go back further, we discover that all theists were polytheists at one time, as far as any that we can ever find any record of for a very long span of human history. If we go back even further than that, we discover that theism in general is a concept which evolved from primitive people assigning agency to natural phenomenon. Now, I didn't include that here. Again, this was the first draft. There is the mystery, right? There is what I call the river. There is the something that is, what do you do with it, right? It's there. Some people are aware of it. The problem isn't that people are aware of it. The problem is that people, in order to make it useful and relevant and something they can discuss, they give it narrative. They give it concrete ideas to talk about, like people and places and things and events and stories about how it all came about, so they can kind of codify and unify and discuss these ideas. Without that, there's just the something, and you either intuit it or not. You feel it or you don't. So I don't think it's as simple as saying that they were simply assigning agency to natural phenomenon, but that was a huge part of it. I would even say that's the most of what they were doing there. That certainly is what relevant scientists, social scientists, and archaeologists and religious historians are saying. Eventually, in Greece, a quasi-theistic world theory called Stoicism emerged. Early Christians borrowed and adapted some parts of Stoicism to create their own words of God. For example, that's where they got the idea of the Logos from. They borrowed heavily from Hebrew religions too. However, with this, at least they admit it, right? They had to admit that because they were going to use the Hebrew religion as a foundational premise for their own emerging claim to moral authority. Although, to be fair, Christianity started in earnest. It wasn't always a willful conspiracy to hijack other people's lives by hijacking their minds. At first, it was just an obscure Jewish sect. They became a military messianic doomsday cult, at first under a guy named John, otherwise known as John the Baptizer, and then next under a guy called Jesus. Both very common names, by the way. Jesus was just a variation of the name Joshua. It changed the most, however, decades later, after some covert clinical narcissist, if you ask me at least, named Saul took over. Their Messiah was executed by the Romans for being a militant political enemy to Roman authority. Not necessarily one that they took super seriously, but one that, was drawn to their attention and fine, we'll take care of it. At the time, Judaism did not include the idea that the promised Messiah would die for anyone's sins. Instead, that local and obscure cult developed the idea after their leader died. It was a way to turn their crushing defeat into a spiritual victory. Failed apocalyptic cults always do that. They always reimagine their own belief system so that their own failed end-of-the-world prophecies become spiritual and thus actually succeeded even though they seem to have failed initially. They also borrowed heavily from the much broader scope of Hellenism. Hellenism is a noun that refers to ancient Greek culture ideals or the adoption of Greek language, customs, art, and thought. It can also refer to the principles, ideals, and pursuits of classical Greek civilization or the national character of the Greeks. The word Hellenism comes from the word Hellenismus, which means an imitation of or similarity to the Greeks. Along the way, they created something unique with all those borrowed and adapted pieces. Personally, I think the Stoics had worked it out much better. They believe the universe has always existed. They believed it just keeps getting recycled and reborn. Early Stoics did not believe in a literal personal super authority figure who willed nor spoke the universe into existence. What they called God was an impersonal intelligence and virtue that imbued the universe with those properties. It wasn't a person in the sense that religious people speak of it. It wasn't many persons either. There was no political agenda, no coming kingdom, no king to speak of. It had nothing to do with moral or political authoritarianism, although it was relevant to morality. There was no threats made, not even as a friendly warning to require everyone to embrace some bizarre religious narrative or else. No religious platform given to humans upon which predator wolves could gain power by posing as fellow sheep. No authoritarian pyramid organizations that put women and children at special risk of being sexually assaulted. No system of emotional and cognitive manipulations meant to bend reality and bend knees, where those in power just coincidentally gain direct personal benefits to their egos, their desire to control others to make the world feel safer for themselves, and benefits to their bank accounts. None of that was happening in Stoic thought. No need for our money. No attempt to generate intense and irrational shame, just so self-authorized agents can then white knight rescue us by helping us alleviate the crippling shame that they intentionally caused in the first place, and in a way that creates a cycle of dependence and exploitation. Of course, I'm talking about Christianity and Islam, fundamentalist versions at least. Via the way that they place rescued people under the authority of fallible men whom claim to wield power in the name of God. Here we have the meme image, one of my favorites. Dorothy speaking to the Wizard of Oz, now that he's no longer hiding behind the curtain. And her statement there is, you invented a supreme being to manipulate people? Who does that? No demons or devils. Thus, no framework for literally demonizing everyone who thinks, lives, and loves differently than a self-select tribe of special people. No artificial narrative framework that others people by treating an in-group as uniquely valuable people group, replacing one form of racism for another. Here we have an image. This is a legit image where we have two Christians, a black man and a white man, and their hands are firmly grasped in friendship, right? In the front of the white man's shirt says, "No Jesus," K-N-O-W, "No Jesus, no peace." Now, the back of the shirt, in case you haven't seen it before, it's not represented here, is the same statement, but with the word N-O instead of K-N-O-W. So it's no Jesus, no peace, right? There's a threat implied in that, ladies and gentlemen. So they're holding up a sign that says there is only one race in the body of Christ, and that's the Christian race, Galatians 3:28. So what they've done there is they've replaced one artificial construct for othering everyone that isn't in your in-group. They replaced one form of racism for another. Stoicism didn't do that. The Stoicism is where Christianity borrowed a lot of its ideas from. There was no intentional, fictional account of world history and religious history. They may not have been super well informed about the real world history and religious history, but within Stoicism, there was no intention to deceive. They were trying to represent it as best they could. And I do charge that early Christian writers were intentionally changing the story, just like Hebrews were. This is something that Dr. Kip and Dr. Josh Bowen, Kip Davis, Josh Bowen, Jennifer Bird, and I can't remember who the fourth one was, but they were talking about this here a couple months ago, where the Hebrews, when they wrote their stories, were intentionally lying about what they've been through. They were creating the Israelites by creating stories about the Israelites. They were creating an identity for themselves. But with Stoicism, there were no mystical curses, no blaming any individual for the quote-unquote sins of others, no shaming all humans for merely being imperfect, no devaluing of this life with a priority focus on the next, no de-incentivizing the goal of making this world better for everyone. Christianity does that, with the idea that this world is scheduled to crash and burn anyways, any day now, for thousands of years and counting. So why bother? Why bother cleaning it up? Why bother putting everything we have into trying to make this world a better place for each other and for our descendants, when this world any day now is supposed to crash and burn anyways? It de-incentivizes the necessary human goal of creating as much common flourishing as possible in this world. In contrast, Mental illness was not giving magical explanations of spiritual sickness. Now, this is one of my other complaints about Christianity historically. They cast mental illness as spiritual illness, which ultimately and unfairly blamed the afflicted, right? So if you're suffering from some kind of mental illness, whether it's kind of passive and subtle or extreme and whatever, then the idea was that you're spiritually ill and you brought it upon yourself. You need to pray harder. You need to go to meetings more. You need to believe harder somehow. You need to purge your thoughts of all unclean thoughts, right? Like lust and covetousness and all this other stuff, right? So it will blame mental illness on the people who have the mental illness by calling it spiritual sickness and blaming the person for having brought that upon themselves. That was a problem because it held back progress. It held back, it negated proper compassion and empathy and support from people's friends and family, and it held back progress. So as science was developing, medical science, the necessary manpower and the necessary funding, the necessary efforts to go into understanding and then conquering various forms of mental illness was not getting the human resources that it needed because too many people were still stuck in this religious narrative where they thought, well, mental illness is really just spiritual illness and the answer's in this book, right? It was a big problem. We're still paying for that problem today. There was no pressure on young people to get married before their brains are even done forming, let alone before they've really matured enough to make such a commitment. There was no pressure on abused married persons to remain with their abusers, again, unlike with Christian fundamentalism and Islamic fundamentalism. No indoctrinating of children into complex and irrational belief systems, which attempt to force developing minds into an organized form of learned helplessness so that they'll remain obedient sheep for their whole lives. No brain fucking games. Sorry for the F-bomb, but I think it's necessary here. Telling people they own their creator, they owe their creator, sorry, I have to go back, typo, an apology for how he made them. Imagine that. Think about that. Within the Christian narrative, borrowing parts from the Hebrew narrative, the creator of the universe created you and me, and we've been imperfect since there even was a you or a me. Therefore, he created us imperfect. But he doesn't like that we're imperfect, even though he chose to make us that way. And so we need to feel sorry for how imperfect he made us. We need to make it up to him somehow. So we need to grovel at his feet for scraps of undeserved kindness and love. And beg and plead and try to prove worthy of him promising that someday he'll remake us so that we're not so flawed, so that we'll be worthy hanging out with. We'll be worthy to step foot inside of his house. We'll be worthy of a relationship with him. We'll be worthy of not destroying and throwing away like trash forever. It's such a messed up set of ideas. Or that they can't have, or that we can't have true love, joy, purpose, and value as a person until and unless we embrace a set of irrational dogmas as true, or fake it as Pascal wagered. So yeah, sure, you can ease us into that mess and hope it sticks. You can begin that process by asking a few simple and loaded questions. Questions designed to smuggle non-facts into my head as facts. It's a long shot, but if it works, I'll join you in pretending that those are facts, such as that physics had a true beginning, or that such a beginning requires a who, or that it could only have been one single who, or a 3-in-1 who, to make it even stranger yet. That way you can build a model of reality in my head upon faulty premises. If that works, to then trap me there. This is a link to a scientific article called How Religious Fundamentalism Hijacks the Brain. It's from Psychology Today. But first, you'd have to assume that I'm woefully uninformed, emotionally desperate, and have easily manipulatable cognitive faculties. I wouldn't make that bet if I were you, but I'll admit it could be fun to try. So that was the blog that I wrote this morning. Scrolling back down, Tempted to have Hank on here because he's been caught up in some controversies with associated channels. YouTube Punk says, James, are you familiar with the Esoterica channel? Their Yahweh video was insightful. I'm familiar with the channel. I don't usually watch them, and I will go check that out for sure. Thank you for the recommendation, YouTube Punk. I'm scrolling back up. Oh, people are arguing with the Hank. Yeah, I don't feel like arguing with the Hank. I agree, James Supernatural. Yeah, we covered that already. Scrolling back down. Yeah, so Hank has a different way of thinking, a different way of being in the world, a different relationship to language. And the way that Hank is engaging with some of the people in our network is evoking negativity, right? There's friction there. There's almost animosity there, right? It's not good. It's not progress. But I don't know if I want to host that discussion or not. I think it could be a sidetrack from where I'm trying to be today. Cause autoimmune responses to institutions that oppress me. Oh well, I mean, I think we're with you on that at least, Hank. I mean, we can relate to that at least. I don't want to get distracted with what's going on in chat. It's really not on topic as far as I can tell. The League of Militant Atheists, just like Soviet Russia, they turned me into a skeptic. I don't know what to do with that, Hank. I'm really not sure. I mean, I understand that sometimes people who are pushing back against established religions can be abrasive and aggressive and absolutist in the way that they use language and address the issues. And I understand that sometimes, even if their points are legitimate, sometimes that can be counterintuitive to progressive dialogue. And I understand that just like some people get so fed up with religion that they swing hard the other way, some people get so fed up with the way that skeptics engage with issues that they swing harder in a different direction as well. It happens, right? Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm not against it, Hank. I think that we could have you on here on a different day, maybe tomorrow or the next day. It just would be we would definitely be leaving the track that I laid out for the stream and entering another one. If somebody else wants to engage with me as kind of a referee on this, let me know and we can do that. But other than that, I probably won't. So that's where I'm at today. It's difficult for me whenever somebody on the interwebs says something in a space where it doesn't belong. And it happens a lot on Facebook where there'll be a group that has nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with Christianity. And Christian religious fundamentalists will look for opportunities to make the discussions or make the channel or the space relevant to their religious beliefs, where they can push their religious ideas, the religious narrative. And I think the problem I have with that is that it's not just a set of ideas, right? Christianity, or at least literal versions of Christianity, is not merely a philosophy. It's not merely a set of ideas that they're disagreeing with other people about. It is a larger systematic effort as part of a larger culture war that's destructive and misguided, to dominate societies, to infiltrate and to exploit and to dominate. And at an individual level, it's an attempt to exploit and dominate minds. On a societal level, it's an attempt to dominate and exploit entire political systems. And it's not healthy. It's not justified. It's ugly and it's destructive and it hurts people and it generates all kinds of forms of tragedy. So it's not just a set of ideas, right? Because we can just discuss those. And this is why I feel like every time I see that in a public space where it doesn't belong, I feel like somebody should either shut that shit down right away or else call them out for the bullshit. This is the reason why I don't see a lot of pushback happening against Wiccans or against Native American spiritualists, right, amongst the atheists. The idea is don't cause any harm and you won't get any pushback. For the most part, non-Abrahamic or non-moral authoritarian religious beliefs are pretty innocuous. I wouldn't quite say that they're entirely harmless, but the harm that they have the potential to pose to societies and the way that people think is certainly less pronounced, less aggressive, less immediately consequential than the more authoritarian religions are. They're also less busy trying to spread and push than the more authoritarian religions are. So I think of them separately, very separately. So if somebody comes into a space where it necessarily doesn't belong, and they talk about their spiritual beliefs in a broader context where there's no threat, right? There's no attempt to manipulate or to lie or coerce anything, then I don't mind it at all. I may or may not agree with it, but I don't mind it. I don't object to it. Why bother, right? You do, if that's, somebody this morning was talking about the power of the moon and our spiritual connection to it. And we can soak up the powers of the moon and channel that into positive spiritual energy. And I'm like, psychologically, I'm sure that's true. Right. And then if that's the mechanism that they use, the narrative that they use in order to facilitate the mechanism of transferring a, a natural experience into something that's inspiring for them, connecting for them, empowering for them, and they want to say, hey, it could work that way for you too, I'm all for that. I'm okay with it. I'm not going to go R and raw on people and get all, you know, mean about it. Though he usually has a reason. He's usually railing against fundamentalist of moral authoritarians, right? And I'm agree with him. I'm 100% on that same page with Art Rob. I just think that uh, I just can't get on board with where they draw the line, right? Because I think that spirituality can be a legitimate domain of exploration and discovery and growth. I just think that it can only be that once we clear it up, once we clean it up, once we completely disambiguate it from more authoritarian religions, to talk about things that are only healthy, only practical, only have good use that benefits everyone. Because if there's no harm, then there's no foul, in my opinion. And I do want to see everybody out there empowered in such a way that it brings a greater cohesion, a greater harmony, a greater peace, a greater health, individual lives and in collective lives. If we can do that without it being at the expense of other people, then go for it. Again, this is my problem with Christian fundamentalism and Islamic fundamentalism, is because the forms of empowerment that they grab for themselves come at the expense of other non-consenting people. And that's not okay. That definitely crosses the line. Yeah, there's a bunch of discussions with Hank, and I haven't followed enough of it. I saw my spirit moon while checking myself for ticks. Answers in atheism. Wearing your gown still, Mike, says Captive Dave does. So yeah, if somebody wants to come in here before I close this out and have kind of a part two, a discussion relevant to the stuff, whether it's in response to something I've said or Hank has said, I'll open up the floor. We can bring in Hank and somebody else, but I want everybody to be nice about it. Let's try to be civil. If not, or if nobody wants to talk about the issues I'm presenting here, then we can close this out. This was my blog today, and this were my thoughts today. And this is my effort today, or my ambition, my goal, my focus, my center, to say, okay, if we have to call out fundamentalism for the harm that it does and the games that it plays, sure, right? Because it still permeates our society, it still infiltrates our government, it still ruins lives on every level. But I also want to talk about how we have more in common with Christians and even Muslims than we have in common, right? When they're not wearing their religious hats, when they're not wearing their religious labels, when they're not speaking on a religious premise, when they're just being regular people living life, then we have so much in common that I think we need to pay more attention to it. Our common interest in justice, our common interest in peace and health and in healing, in connection. And I think that gets lost along the way while we're busy railing against or raging against the religious machines. Sometimes we can forget that if what we're trying for is cohesion, if what we're trying for is to break down the walls and generate peace and connection and respect, then we need to make sure that we disambiguate. We need to make sure that we take the time to let the persons know, I don't want to be your enemy. I don't think that's the best narrative framework for us going forward. I think religion, along with common human failings, generates this tendency toward dividing and railing against each other. And I think we need to grow and heal past it. I think we need to move past it. That's the point. Is it really a gown if it doesn't have a hat to go with it? Asks Nerdy Rodent. I'm so enraged I'm getting ready to cancel James. Hashtag cancel James, says Nerdy Rodent. So, all right, guys, that's it. Nobody asked for the turn it into an open panel, so I'm not going to. If people had wanted to, I would have. So let's close it out here for now. We started off with 11 people. We went up to 12, and we're back down to 10. It's fluctuating around there. We'll go ahead and call it a quits. It's already been 1 hour and 5 minutes. I usually try to keep the streams to an hour now when I do them. So, yeah, Mike, I can. Hold on, I can. Oh, how do you do that again? Man, it's been a while, right? Is it invite? Yes, it is. It's been so long since I've opened up the panel, I forgot how to do it. Sure, I'll drop that link in here real quick. And that's fine. Mike, do you want to come in to talk about... Oh, let Mike come in first. Hold on just a minute. Let Mike come in first. And then we'll see what we're going to do with... end on a funny question mark, YouTube punk. Well, I think Mike wants to come in, so we'll see where this goes for a minute. Dropping links like a pro, said Nerdy Rowan. Yeah, I have no idea. What's this button do? So, all right, 1 second. First, we'll go with atheism. Mike, do you want to engage with Hank, or do you want to talk about something else?
I don't think I want to engage with Hank. I have no idea where that would go. I don't think it would go anywhere good. What do you think? Have you listened to him at all?
Here's the thing. I caught part of his what he was saying that one day, right? And then I don't know. Like I've missed too much. I probably missed too much. Now I agree with Hank about some things. I agree that we could be more flexible with how we define God. That other people are defining it differently. We can simply meet them where they're at. If this person defines it in such a way, as long as people tell us how they're defining the term, and then within that context, they give us a statement to work with within the context of that definition, I'm fine with evaluating it on its own terms without holding the other person accountable to or bound to a fundamentalist definition of God. I'm fine with that, right?
Yeah.
It's so...
Well, I define God as being like the universe, right? It's like, whatever that is. Whatever created all of this, you can call that God if you want. You could slap that label on it, right?
All right, sure.
As long as the God doesn't have like human characteristics like will and mind and all that bullshit, I'm fine. Sure. Like in AA meetings all the time, I have to use the word God so that I can communicate with these motherfuckers. Oh, I'm sorry, I swore. Am I supposed to swear here?
It's whatever.
Okay. Anyway, so I use that term all the time, and then they come up to me and they say, "Oh, you're so spiritual, Mike. You're so religious, And it's like, and I'm like, no, I'm an atheist. I'm sorry, I'm an atheist.
What does the term atheist mean to you?
I'm an atheist if I'm around a believer of a particular ilk, right? Particular kind of believer. Like a Christian believer believes that there is a man God sort of thing that lives outside the universe, that has will and plans, and he thinks about things, and he has emotions and morality, and he judges, and he gets disappointed. So it's like basically like a big human thing, right?
A parent, like a big parent.
Yeah, and I'm an atheist in respect to that mental man God pig thing. Like a man God pig. I don't know what it is. So the only way I can be an atheist is if I'm around some particular believer.
Right. So you're not.
And
right. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. If there were like a Buddhist who believes that the universe is like this cyclic thing, with some sort of karmic pattern that has something to do with human minds, I'm an atheist around that guy too, right? Because
Alright.
he made the mistake of making God like a human mind. And I believe mind is a bit of protoplasm. And if you don't have this particular structure of protoplasm inside your skull, then you can't have a mind. I don't believe that minds can exist without physicality. So I'm an atheist around all those kind of gods.
All right. So what would you say to somebody who defined God in such a way that it was a way of saying that we can, if they say, for example, that we can be our own God, if what they mean by that is that we can be the ultimate authority over our own mental universe, over our own identity, and that we can be the creator of the mental universe in which we mentally exist and experience life. Would you be okay with? Would you sign off on that, or would you rage against that as well?
No, I'd be an atheist against that as well, because you can't basically you can't do your own mind. Your mind is being controlled by everything around you and everybody around you as well, as much as yourself, right? Your environment is as much your mind as you are, as your
Sure.
body is, right?
Sure.
So they would be trying to. Well, they'd be almost like solipsists, right? They're creating, yeah.
So what if they pose that as you're the captain of your own ship, but you can't control the wind, you can't control the weather, you can't control the currents, you can't control the waves, right? And so you can't control other people captaining their own ships. So this way, they're finding a middle ground between the two ideas to say that you have some responsibility as a captain of a ship, but you have limited powers in terms of how the forces of nature are going to carry your ship. All you can do is accept responsibility for how you navigate within the context of your limited power. And that in that way you're captain of your ship, and in that way you're the god of your journey. Would you be able to find peace with that middle ground, or no?
A little bit, because that kind of implies, okay, we do have will. We have this occurrent mechanism where we can select the next thing that we want to do, right? We can plan ahead. So we do have some kind of will. That is, it's a physical system, but it feels like will. And if they wanted to go along with that, as long as they understand that if they're the captain of the ship, then they're not at the helm, they're down there in the galley somewhere cooking dinner and sort of making suggestions about how the ship runs.
Sure. I think a lot of times the purpose of somebody trying to conceptualize us as the captain of our ship on these turbulent seas, with so many other competing ships competing for space and what have you,
right?
Sometimes trying to raid our ship. The idea is to promote a sense of personal responsibility and accountability.
Yeah, and that's not bad.
Right. Because we don't want to de-emphasize our role in our lives so much that we just throw our hands up and say, well, whatever happens, happens. And because we want people to be personally responsible and accountable. And we want to encourage people to have a narrative where they're responsible for what they do at the wheel, even if they can't completely control the forces that are going to be pushing our ship in a different direction.
Yeah, but then, okay, if they did something bad with the ship, right? They drove the ship into a bad harbor.
Sure.
And now it's 2 weeks later, and you're judging them and calling them all kinds of names and saying, "Oh, shame, shame, shame." Then I think it would kind of run counter to that. Would be a bad thing, right? Because sometimes you are, down in the galley at the bottom of the ship, you're yelling at people. Go tell whoever's pulling the levers up there to do this, do that. By the time it gets up there, it may not work out the way you want. So right. I would, that kind of attitude that, you are in charge of your own ship and you're totally responsible for everything you did in your past. That just isn't what humans are about. We are kind of like, we're operating the ship with noodles, not with a stiff arm, right?
Not with oars and not with engines.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So, but I can see where they'd be going with that. But, if you want to call that, would they call that God? You're your own God? I don't know.
Right.
Then there's the Buddhist idea that you are God because there really is no such thing as you. There's no boundary to your skin. Your skin is leaking chemicals all the time, as anybody who doesn't wear around somebody who doesn't wear deodorant can figure out. So there's no boundary between you and the universe. So you are basically, I mean, you can identify with the entire universe and say, when I die, it's just a change. No big deal. That kind of God I could go with, but
Yeah.
you are God, right? You are the universe.
Or so,
But
right. So with all this in mind, so we're agreeing that there's got to be some kind of balance between encouraging personal responsibility and
yes,
narratives which promote personal responsibility, but at the same time, not to the extent that we're damning and overly critical of people where we pretend they had more control or more say than they really did.
right. That's
Right.
perfect because you use the word balance.
Yeah.
Okay, that's God. Balance.
I like that. So,
Yeah.
but this seems, now I might have missed something, but this seems like it's like in agreement with what Hank has said about God and about things. No, did I miss something? Did he disagree with me somewhere?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where he's going with this. You believe in God because you believe in the fictional God, right? You believe in the idea of God, so then you believe in God. That's all I know about Hank. And then I saw him on a panel with some real whack job, and I got a real bit. I got really afraid of Hank. It's like, okay, if you're sitting there listening to this whack job talk about his conspiracy theories, and each nodding agreement to each other, I thought, okay, I want to stay away from Hank. But maybe I misjudged him.
Maybe because I haven't followed those discussions. What channel was that at?
Oh shit, I don't know. It was this. Oh god, it's a guy's name, Telbot or Telcott or something like that. Jack Telcott.
How did you end up there?
I think I searched for Hank, or else somebody give me a link to him on that channel.
Oh, I see.
And now I've been getting, and I've been getting
algorithms pushing it. Yeah,
right. It's pushing it, right.
Yeah, I get that.
So I'm not sure what the hell that was about. So your blog today, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were streaming, so I came in late, and I'm just kind of trying to catch up. But this is the subject of your blog today. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you give me a lead here?
Right. So I was on a Facebook discussion group, and Christians push their religion everywhere they can. It's one of those places.
Right.
It wasn't even a religious group, and so they asked me, and they're like, "Who's your master?" And my answer was physics. And then they're like, "Well, who created physics?" And
my God.
And then I wrote this response to that. One, to point out that that's begging the question, and then two, to explain how that's begging the question, to list things we don't know, so we can't justify asking the question that way. And then I explained a history of the Hebrew and Christian religions in context to illustrate that these are contrived systems of control, and that it's not really justified in terms of facts or logic or ethics or anything else. And so that was the basics of the blog. Was they're trying to smuggle in a who into the discussion by begging the question in that way, and that it was part of a larger effort to hijack not just my individual identity or framework of identity, but anybody who might be vulnerable to that or fall victim to that. Because if they can control who you think you are in the world, they can leverage a lot of control over the rest of your life. And that's exploitative, and it's unfair, and it's dishonest in the way they go about it. And it's more power than any human should have over another, even if they wield that power in the name of a god. And if there's a super being in the universe who told them to go do that, then that super being is being unethical. Because
let him speak for himself.
Right, let them speak for themselves, because no super being who's being ethically responsible would place that much power into the hands of a fallible human over other fallible humans.
Right.
And
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's it. And I didn't put it exactly that way in the blog. Maybe I will when I go back and edit it, because I found some typos. But that's it. That was the gist of the blog and the thing for today. But I also wanted to couch that in this overarching point that if our purpose or our focus to rage against the machines of religion is to say, quit dividing us, quit trying to hijack other people's lives, quit dividing us into separate people groups where basically you're redefining racism, but you're still being a racist, you're still othering. Stop. Right. If our point is to say, stop doing that, then we need to be aware of how sometimes we secular humanistic people can accidentally do the same thing. We can feed too much into the us versus them idea because we're so upset with how they're behaving, right? That we can lose sight easily of just how much we really are the same people, and we want to go forward to healing and growing and in harmony. We want to connect with these people to be a people, to be a part of a larger reality. But if we stay so focused on how angry we are at them, reasonably so, don't get me wrong, that we can accidentally feed the polemic without meaning to.
Yeah, I wonder what if I'm doing that with Jim Bob. I don't know, but yeah. So Hank is in the back room, and he's saying I don't respect his train. Do you want to get into Hank and try to figure out if he's got something to say or not?
Yeah,
or?
let me try. Let me bring him in. Let me see what he has to say. Just Hank, are you with us?
Yeah.
So you've been listening.
God, I love your hat.
Yeah, that is pretty great. I love the whole outfit. That's nice.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on what we've been saying here, Hank?
So James, what you've been actually, I like pretty much everything you said so far. I like the blog post. I like the commentary. I like everything so far.
Okay, so I appreciate that. I really do. So what do you feel like has been the main point of contention or disagreement or maybe misunderstanding between you and some of the people here in this network?
Oh, it's pretty simple. It's just I don't fit into the mold, so they'd rather just not consider me.
Yeah, that's kind of like it. Yeah.
Yeah, we can. I've seen it a lot. Even without that intention, that there's a lot of people of different ways of thinking and being in the world often don't feel like there's a welcoming place within the skeptical community for them. They feel like people are so absolute in that community, so rigid in the way that they use language and in the way that they address issues, and in the lines they draw between them and spiritual thinking or woo, that there's no place for them in the community. And just the other day, actually 2 weeks ago, Dr. Kara Cooney, who is an Egyptologist, and she's written some really brilliant books. And I don't know if you ever watched. Yeah, you've been a Mythician before.
Yep, I have.
Yeah. So I think Hank has too, if I'm not mistaken.
But anyways, I have, but I haven't for a while because I just didn't like Derek's attitude, so I stopped watching like a couple years ago.
Right. So Dr. Kara Cooney, toward the end of her interview here a couple weeks ago, mentioned that she's a polytheist, and it caught Derek off guard. He didn't know what to do with that, but she said that in response to this moment where he didn't seem to be allowing for polytheism within the community. And she wanted to, he didn't come out and say that there's no allowance for that. He just said something that sounded very atheisty. And she had to say, well, to clarify, I am a polytheist, right? And he's like, oh, it's like he didn't know what to do with that for a moment. It caught him off guard. And it got me thinking about how even if we're trying, and which Derek does, Derek absolutely tries to make a space for people of divergent views within the network or the community, to where they feel like they've got a voice and that they have some respect coming from the channel and coming from the associated voices. But even despite the intention to do that, we can accidentally make people of supernatural beliefs feel unwelcome here. And I do feel like that happens an accident most of the time, that we're so focused on the way that we use language and the way we talk about the issues to be, critical of the theisms that we're getting, that sometimes we need to stop and say, is this where we want to draw the line? Is this the gate that we want to keep in our gatekeeping? Is this the purity standard that we want to insist on in our culture, right? And if we do that, are we accidentally emulating the purity culture, gatekeeping religions that we're railing against? Are we accidentally creating an us versus them that we're just feeding instead of trying to dissolve?
Yeah. I could be a polytheist if I'm walking in the woods during a thunderstorm. I could basically adopt that position for a few minutes or a few hours, but I wouldn't call myself a polytheist in general. So I don't know.
Right. Well,
But
it makes sense because the word theist, it depends on the word God, and the word God in our culture is loaded, right? Because so many people, you say the word, and instantly everybody in the room conjures ideas that they associate with the word, and they'll just, with that, it sabotages the attempt to have good communication because it makes people misunderstand you because they're going to bring all their ideas into the discussion.
yeah, I don't get freaked out about the word God. I can use it interchangeably to mean the wind bending the mighty oaks over in the forest while I'm walking through it or whatever.
And that's kind of
Uh,
what you wanted us to do with the word, right, Hank?
yes, yeah, to take it back. Yeah,
I think that's
take
what
it
Hank.
Yes, yes. I pretty much it's a principle learned from Bill Gates. Of course, he's a crackpot, but he has a good principle. He was doing your presentation, define your terms so people can understand what you mean. So I follow that principle because I think it's actually a good principle.
Right, because the
okay.
whole point of communication is to communicate ideas, and if people don't know what you mean by a word or a phrase, then you're not really communicating.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that, Chris? More?
Sorry, just muted. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
yeah.
Well, for me, I kind of like I probably got a 10 minutes like delay from all this, just to make sure I have mic. The thing is that for me, it's just like I said earlier in the chat, is that basically it's really hard to fall into the very soft-spoken, you know, being an atheist, or for my case, it's more anti-theist. But
Sure.
it's very hard to just not to get irritated because these whole thing of assumptions and like ideas in a box set by theists um, just kind of makes me want to be basically hostile from the get go, because otherwise I'll just get steamrolled and stuff because like I think I know that Speed and you James know me for a while,
Yeah.
but it's like I'm not a debate bro, and when people when apologists try to go into that mode of apologetics and try to circle around their script, not really kind of pulling, you just not wanting to just let me talk or just consider what I have to say, is very annoying. So why should I even bother being quote unquote civil?
Right.
And just basically, and I just prefer to say, like, insert word and just saying sky, using terms like, oh well, you just like Sky Daddy, whatever, and
Right.
stuff like that, just to
Yeah.
get their attention, to get out of the mold. Sometimes due to my emotionally, and sometimes to just trying to put up a mirror about what they are saying, as
Yeah.
in ludicrous. Anyway,
Sure. We get so used to dealing with religious fundamentalists that will absolutely steamroll us if we give them an opportunity, that we get this almost habitualized posture to say, you know what? No, no, I am a force to be reckoned with. You will not roll over me, right? And if they won't have a civil discussion, then we just stop giving them respect, right? And then we get so used to that sometimes accidentally we take an overly aggressive posture with somebody who we mistake as a fundamentalist who walks in the room and mentions God or mentions spirituality, because we're ready to fight. We're ready for that fight.
yeah,
And sometimes we have to stop for a moment and say, wait a minute, maybe this person isn't a fundamentalist. Maybe this person wasn't about to steamroll me. Maybe if I give them a little bit more opportunity to express their ideas, maybe we have more in common than I thought. But that's easier said than done in this network or community because, again, we're so used to dealing with fundamentalists.
yeah. And for me, it's like I haven't really seen Kenny in a while, but that's sometimes like you get the I'm like, I'm not saying I'm painting a broad brush at every time that it goes like this. You get theists that are in this mode to do always, but it, it's just overwhelming. And at least for me, it's just like, okay, where I was going with this, um, it, it's just like people won't like this is that there there's so much of the need to be right, and like even like if I propose to the when I go into one of those formats, and they say, "Oh, why do you God blah blah blah," and I'm like, dude, even if God exists, why should I worship this person? As in, if I should treat like any other human being on this planet that treats the same thing as me. Well, sorry, same thing that I expect for me to be treated, and stuff like that. But somehow I have to still suspend my suspension of disbelief to accommodate for the other person's belief, to just assume it from the get go that somehow I there's somebody way up watching me 24/7 and stuff like that. Sorry, I don't know if that make any sense.
It does.
Yeah.
So, Hank, do you feel like we're kind of getting on the same page now? Do you feel like you're being understood finally?
Pretty close, but one last connector. Relative to me, someone like Forrest Valkyrie would be a fundamentalist because he pretty much he wants to have his group with the normal fundies that he likes to talk to with pretty much polemic to stand trying to arguments. But with me, coming from a former atheist perspective, focusing on philosophy, what I had to say triggers him because it actually has an impact on his worldview, and he wants to end the conversation as soon as possible before I say something that pretty much screws things up for him and his clique.
Right. So there, on that show, there is a particular kind of framework that they're going for. They're looking for a certain kind of rhythm and a certain kind of narrative, a certain kind of exchange. So they aren't really looking for the kind of conversation you wanted to have there. And I understand that sometimes people can be so hardcore in their naturalism, which I tend to be. I'm a naturalist. And a physicalist, but they can accidentally become very polemicist in the way that they engage with their cultural rivals and their ideological rivals, and it makes it really hard sometimes for somebody coming into the discussion when they're like a third party. They're not trying to come in, like you're not trying to come in there as a fundamentalist, but they're going to treat you like one because that's their expectation, and that is the framework for the show. So I just think that there are some settings where you can have a particular kind of conversation, but there are other settings where that's not what the setting space is set aside for. You know what I'm saying? So I think it is possible that if you were to sit down and go fishing with Forrest, for example, and nobody else is around and there's no heated contest, the framework isn't that way. You're just fishing, right? You're just having a nice day, sharing a beer, whatever. And I think that if you started talking about your views, I think there's a good chance that that conversation would go differently, right? It's because it's not part of a stage that's meant for entertainment. It's not part of a stage that's meant for the contest, right? It's not part of the stage that's meant to push back on a culture war. It's just two people talking. And I don't know because I've never hung out with Forrest. I could be wrong. But I think that most of the people in the network or the community that can be quite adamant and quite how to put this, that won't give an inch, right? I think that they would give an inch. I think that they would take the time to hear and engage with more nuance and subtleties on one than they would within certain kinds of channel frameworks.
Well, I'm treating Hank the same way that Forrest is, basically. Just based on like just a guess, right? As to where Hank wants to go. So I haven't basically dipped into it. And he's correct. I have, basically bias against what I've seen so far. So
Mhm.
I will own up to that.
And I think you guys are talking about the ACA. Basically, you have to understand that it's just
I
like
think he's talking about the line, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a line, but it's kind of like an ATA spin-off. And
Yeah,
they have, I
same thing.
agree. Yeah, I agree. With fishing probably different conversations, but you have to understand that underlying all of this is a power game dynamic. There's a clout dynamic. There's a point dynamic.
Oh,
Social.
sure. I
Yeah.
agree.
So yeah. So
Not what I'm
so
doing. Not what I'm doing.
No, not you, but I mean the
Yeah.
structure of a program like the line.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I'm just making knee-jerk decisions as to what I want on my channel.
Right. Now there's
Yeah.
this person that used to come by my channel all the time called Blessed Be He, and they would always say the
Oh,
same
yeah.
thing over and over again. They would say things like, "You need to be purified in the fire."
Right.
He showed you how. You just have to try to remember. And people would always ask, "What do you mean by that?" And they would always refuse to say what they meant by that. And I told them, I'm like, "Look, I'll send you the link. You can come on the screen right now and tell us what you mean by that." And they would never accept the link. They would never explain themselves. And eventually, my moderators got so tired of them disrupting the channel that they eventually blocked them. I didn't block them; they did, but I didn't unblock them either because I'm like, yeah, it's just unless they're willing to tell me what they really mean, there's no point in setting aside a space that I can take advantage of, right? So a lot of times when people hear things in the chat or or on a screen like God this and God that, our immediate knee-jerk response, because we're so used to dealing with fundamentalists, is to shut that shit down right away. We ain't even here for that. But sometimes accidentally we shut it down too quick because somebody was meaning something else and we just didn't realize it. I don't think that happens usually. I think usually we're correct. Usually it is a fundamentalist, but every once in a while we shut it down too quickly and we miss an opportunity to understand somebody's more nuanced positions.
and there's also like Bible quoting, like left and right down in the comment section sometimes. Well, the
Sure.
chat. Anyway, and that basically to non like believers quoting Bible to non-theists ain't gonna win you brownie points.
Yeah.
For the audience in the future, this is basically like in this space. It's kind of considering, it's kind of considered as basically showing your arrogance that you basically that even if we know the quotes, if we do not know that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make anything to us because we don't consider the Bible or any type of scripture, be it Torah, the Quran, or whatever. It's not within our purview. You cannot approach it just like and expect to convince us that you're right.
Right. Absolutely. So it's just right. It's not going to forward the discussion at all. For anybody who comes into a room, whether they're new to this kind of a network or they're experienced with this kind of a network, if they come in quoting Bible passages, they're already shooting themselves in the foot. Because one, we know enough about it to know that that book is mostly horseshit and that it's incredibly abusive. Two, most of us realize that there's some good things in there. Every once in a while, something in a Bible is true. Something in a Bible is good. Every once in a while, it's in there, right? And that's fine, right? But if you want to tell us, hey, I'd like to encourage you today to be more loving towards your neighbors, you can do that without quoting a Bible, especially in a community where most of the people here have been hurt and traumatized by their experiences with Bible-based cultures, right? We ain't here for it, right? Quote from something else, or just raise the issue without quoting from the book. Because if you quote from the book, what are you accomplishing? Because we don't recognize the book as anything that's authoritative for us. We don't recognize the book as something that we care about, right? Except that it affects people's lives. We care about Christianity because it's a dominant socio-political movement, because it has a real impact on the people's lives and the culture where we live and the society where we live. That's why we care. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't give any attention at all to Christianity or Bibles. Thoughts?
Well, sorry. Do you want
What
this?
would you give attention to if you didn't have the Bible and Christianity to pay attention to, or Abrahamism in general? What would you pay attention to next?
It would depend on which were the dominant forces of impact on our society that we thought were problematic and needed to be cleaned up and repaired and revisioned, right? Whatever that would be. Like if it was a different religion or a different socio-political movement or a different ideology, whatever seems to be the most impactful on our lives and on the lives of people we care about, those tend to be the things that we most want to talk about. If there was no moral authoritarian or religions in our society, we would look around and we'd say, okay, what seems to really be impactful right here, right now in our world? Because I want to talk about it. I want to see what we can do to forward the discussion, to bring us onto the same page, to help us heal, to help us resolve. And if we lived in an ideal society where there were no big, giant, major problems, then we would talk about less important problems because there wouldn't be any bigger ones to talk about. So I don't know.
Yeah, I know. My one would be like right to repair and copyright would be that because I can actually prove psychology and schools with religion right now. So, but right to repair and copyright would be my next biggest issue.
Well, yeah, I mean that's great too. And some of us do make time for that, right? We talk about Mike does, for example, on his channel. We talk about psychology and neurophysiology and chemistry and things like that because these things too affect the way that we learn, affect the way that we understand our world, and affect how we move and how we think and how we behave. Quoting from Dr. Robert Sapolsky so much is because he's been really groundbreaking in those domains. So sometimes we talk about how those cross over into religious discussions, and sometimes we talk about those things independently. And you're right, we do need to make time for those discussions, even independently, because we don't want our entire life focus to be only just railing against religion. We want to talk about the way things really do work, not just how they don't.
It's like the evolution like debate that basically gnaws at us. Is that the God of the gaps fallacy that essentially that we encounter when basically theists and mostly the creationist crowd basically think that, oh, we know all the answers, we know everything, that it's all made by and manufactured by and created by this unknowable being that's omnipotent, basically all knowing, all good, and all that stuff into into this ball basically that we call God. And for us, the interpretation we get is that's just lazy. I want, like, for me personally, I have a tremendous interest in basically what's his astronomy. Yeah, astronomy. And, talk about quasar, pulsars, all that stuff, even galaxies and stuff like that. So for me, that's just a fun time. And also looking at basically what happens on Earth with nature and biology and all that stuff. So that's your answer. And to this day, it's one of my prime motivators that gets me up in the morning to say, what can I learn today? And yeah, but when I try to explain this to the normal theist crowd, they say like, oh, this is not like, this is redundant because of X, and so on and so forth. We go in cycles.
Yeah, they don't appreciate it. And that's fine. For everybody out there that can't appreciate what you're saying, it's nice to know that there are people who can appreciate it, right? That's one of the things that this network of interconnected personalities, that some people call the community, has to offer, is that we can come on here and talk about physics, and we can talk about chemistry and neurobiology and sociology in the context of not being religious about it, right? Not assuming that there's a magic man in the sky that makes it all happen. Just have the discussion. Forget about the magic man. Just have the discussion about how people work. It's brilliant. It's wonderful. And that whole idea, that whole, you're waking up in the morning like Chris Moore and saying, What can I learn today? How can I grow today in my understanding of the world with it in my place within it? I think that it's wonderful and beautiful. And I'm not saying Christians don't do that. They do in their own limited context, right? It's just that everything that they explore and everything that they discover is obligated to fit within a narrative. And anything that doesn't, they must discount it. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that's the real problem.
Yeah, like yesterday I did a stream on morality is biology, basically. And the point I was trying to make is that from single-celled organisms all the way through to what we are today, the entire story of the evolution of all animals and plants and whatever, that there is a single golden thread that goes through it, this moral thread. And at the end of that, I can start talking about spirituality and getting a sense of that history and those origins, right? And I'm coming from an entirely physicalist point of view, but I'm talking about spirituality, and I'm trying to make reference to something that we can all deeply feel, right? And come back to humanity, right? And talk to other humans and connect with even some Christians and spiritual people on that feeling of spirituality. Now, some atheists would shut me down because I said the word spirituality or talked about a golden thread of morality running through life. You see what I mean? I'm trying to. I mean, I fully accept physicalism and naturalism, and at the same time, I get to have my cake and eat it too, because I can have those spiritual feelings and that feeling of my connection to my past. You see what I'm saying, James?
Yeah, we are more than the sum of our parts.
Yeah.
But we cannot detach that from the parts that make it work.
Right. Yeah, and that allows you to read all about human beings, to read about all those neurons and what they're doing. In fact, today I was making connections between losing your train of thought. What happens when you lose your train of thought when you're talking, and things that go on in your basal ganglia. That's what I was studying this morning.
Yeah.
And it's really cool when you can find something physical that really matches up with something that we all know about, like talking and losing our train of thought.
I agree. Though I will admit that when I was on your stream the other day and you were talking about this topic, I felt like some of your statements were a bit reductionist.
Oh yeah.
And I
want to avoid that.
I wanted to call you on it, but there was just so many people on the panel I didn't get a chance to.
Oh, please call me. I don't want to be reductionist. I want to be constructionist. Like, okay, you'll reduce it to, okay, this is because of this. And you can make that statement. And what you've done is a reduction for an intuition or a start on the thing.
Yeah.
But now you have to construct the entire thing.
Right.
And explain, well, how the hell does it really work? Well, it's a lot more complicated than any reduction is going to. So if I said something, I would like you to call me on whatever it was that you found, and let's have that conversation, because I don't want to be reductionist. I hate reduction, except for reduction is a teaching tool. It's like when they say, "Oh, the cell is mechanical" or whatever. Well, that's a good teaching tool, but that's not what's going on at all. What's really going on is so much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Anyway, and there's also like the going on from that. I don't know if you like the whole buzz in the basically apologist community is the deconstruction, quote unquote. They call it movement, but it's just plain old just deconstruction. It's basically just, at least to me, is just the willingness to take what you believe and all your system of value and everything on that, and just try to go over it, reevaluate it, and then edit out if you don't need, like, if it's unnecessary or, well, not unnecessary, but it's not relevant to the other discussion or just like the place and time that you live in. If it in the end, what you're looking for is to have a better outcome in your life. I don't
Sure.
know.
That makes sense. It's a continual process where we revisit and refine ideas and how we engage with those ideas to make them more useful for us going forward in our journey, individually and collectively, in terms of how we talk to others about it. And yeah, it's a process. We're never really done with the process, right? It's just,
Yes.
it'll be forever ongoing for as long as we're here.
And
What are
that's
your
why.
thoughts? Go ahead.
And that's why.
Yeah, I have a thought.
What's your thought, Hank?
Yeah, so personally, I think reduction is a bad teaching tool, but it can be done safely if you enforce context and what's called abstraction. If you implement both of those good, then it can be done safely. But I think reduction is a bad teaching tool, especially if you're not explicit about it, because then you'll fall into contradictions and you not account for them.
Right. So, in order to use a reduction to an idea as a teaching tool, we got to be really, really careful that we don't just leave it at the reduction, right? That we say that we tell our audience or our students or whoever that.
Yeah, reduction is the headline. It's the title of the chapter, right? The reduction.
We have to be very quick and responsible, like Hank is saying. We have to be quick and responsible to say, "Oh, don't leave it there," right? Because if we just leave it there, then we haven't communicated something that's correct and appropriately detailed. So yeah, as long as you can start with a reductionist statement, but don't leave it there. Otherwise, you've worked against your own purpose. So
that's what really pisses me off about most Christian discussions about evolution is they'll ask me, oh, how did the tooth evolve or the snake fang evolve? And then I start to tell them and they don't want to listen, right? They want me to give them a reductive one sentence complete solution to the problem that's going to convince them about how it evolved. And that's impossible. And I went through that with Rebecca. About the evolution of the liver, and she didn't want to listen to any of the details. She wanted me to give her. Yeah, she wanted me to say, evolution magically produced the liver. That's what she wanted me to say in one sentence. And it's like, not an explanation.
You have to understand, Rebecca, and like you're talking to a 12-year-old, and I don't mean that to be insulting, but when you're on these topics, she's 12, and you have to engage her with that. So,
and that's hard.
Sure, because that's not what we're here for.
Right.
Yeah, inappropriate reductionism is why flat earthers exist. That's pretty much the main reason why they even exist in the first place.
Right. Yeah, so for example, Mike, when you said that biology is the reason for our morality, I wanted to interject with an example of how biology, really misses the mark on how for example, my moral intuitions developed. One of the things that I've noticed about the way that humans develop their moral ideals, especially the ones that they're invested in, is injury. If we end up in a situation where we are being treated very, very unjustly in a way that really traumatizes us socially and emotionally, and in terms of like who we are in the world, like we just right. If we end up in these moments, whether it's because of a categoric prejudice in society, which I'm sure like LGBT persons have to wrestle with, for example, or whether it's more specific to your situation and not categoric, right? What happens is we get so upset with the wrongdoer, the person who's done injustice to us, that if this is an issue we'd never thought about before, right? If we've never thought about this particular kind of injustice, then we can go through our life without any particular sense of investment into that issue as a moral issue. But after we've experienced an injustice, it polarizes us against the things that hurt us. Right now we care. Now we care that this particular form of injustice exists in the world. And now we have a pronounced, defined, and articulated stand about the issue that we never would have developed if it weren't for the fact that we ended up under that particular kind of injustice. So this is why I say that reducing it to biology, for example, doesn't account for the lived experience of the polemic, of the I've been wronged, and in order for me to justify how outraged I am at being wronged, I now have to articulate how it's wrong, the thing that they did to me. And in the process of trying to explain, even to ourselves, why what they did is wrong, we are in that process developing our moral framework. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but let's fight.
Sure. But this is why I say, because the thing that I just explained, even though biology is underneath it, because biology is why we felt wounded, right? Biology was directly involved in generating the feelings that we're upset about. But then once we've got those feelings, our ideological response to the situation is what really finishes the process.
Yeah, that's a layer above.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And that's important to understand. And at some point yesterday, I said what I consider evil about Christianity is that they take these simple scenarios where somebody's attacked and somebody feels put upon and somebody gets aggressive and whatever, and they try to write down a dogma around it, right? And when you write down that dogma, I consider that evil because that dogma is very rigid and it doesn't allow for all the edge cases and all the counterexamples. So I could, but that's that rational layer above where you're going to get into things like, I pointed out that there was this individual in Germany back in the 20th century that did a bunch of bad things based on an ideology. Well, he basically took that rational layer and wrote it down in rigid ink, and then went on to do much harm to other people, right? Sure. As a result of it. So I mean, yeah, I accept that, and that's all biology too. It's just that rationality is much more complicated biology, right?
Sure. Although part of the problem that particular historical figure did is he had false facts to work with. He had this idea in his head that the Jews, for example, were somehow genetically different in some way that gave them less capacity for being an effective and productive part of a human social system. That there was something wrong with their genetics. That was tied to their ethnicity that gave them lesser capacity. He was factually wrong about that. So he took a factually wrong thing and he wove that into his rigid thinking about what to do about the factually wrong thing. This is something I've noticed about sexism and about racism, is that the reason most sexists and racists don't know that they're sexist and racists is because they have some false facts in their head about the people that they feel superior to. They don't know that those are false facts. So then they work those false facts into an idea about what to do about it and how to address it. And that ends up being a big part of the problem. If you could force the Hitlers of our world to only have accurate facts, the rigidity of their thought processes wouldn't be enough
would dissolve.
Yes, it wouldn't be enough to lead them into atrocities. They have to include false facts in order to arrive at their drive to do atrocities.
Yeah, that's part of writing it down.
Hank, what's your thought about that?
Oh, I spent lots of times melting the worldviews of would-be fascists because my existence ends up contradicting their worldview. So they end up moderating, becoming neoliberals or something.
Yeah, your existence isn't properly understood in the context of their worldview.
Yes.
So, Mike, what were you saying? Sorry.
Yeah, that part of that process of writing it down as a fact, that a certain race is more inclined to crime than another race, right? Part of writing that rigid fact down makes it a wrong fact, because life is a lot messier than that, right?
Sure, we write something down, we commit to it. We're making it more real to ourselves when we speak it and when we write it, and then it makes it harder for us to notice that we're wrong, or even if we're confronted with it, right? We're less willing to concede that maybe we were wrong once we've committed ourselves to the error.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah, there's this whole Jim Bobby and anti-feminist shit that's going on right now on his channel. It is so stinky. And it's basically because they think they have some facts from the Bible, from 2,000 years ago, about what a woman's place is in a man's life, that sort of thing.
Right.
And that shit, that is the essence of evil, as far as I'm concerned. If you want,
Right.
like somebody asked me to define evil, that's it.
Right.
Basically,
So,
getting too hung up on that.
I mean, sure, these ideas trace back to the idea that the woman was created as an afterthought, and for the benefit. One second. And for the benefit of men, and that they were created as a weaker vessel, that they were
Right.
designed in such a way that they were meant to be subservient. They were designed to be subservient. Now, because these ideas are just factually wrong, right? They create all kinds of problems when people try to build a worldview with these wrong facts, and it
Yep.
ends up making it to where these people don't know that they're being sexist, because what they think that they're doing is acknowledging fundamental differences that make women less capable. Therefore, the men have to step up, take the lead, and reserve the authority and the power in social systems, whether it be family systems or political systems or government or corporate systems, right? Because they're like, women are less capable, therefore we're doing them a service to stand up and take the lead. But it all starts with the error of thinking that women were designed or are genetically less capable. That's the problem. Hold on one second. Who else we got here? Oh, we've got Nitty. Hey there. Hold on a second. Here we go.
They're making the binary mistake, basically. There are just two genders. It's like when you look at all human beings and line them all up, you're going to find so many gray areas. Robert Sapolsky did a really good job of explaining the biology behind that.
Yeah.
And how many gray areas there are in our developmental process, and how many different kinds of men and women there are. But if you line them all up and start grading them according to some masculinity, femininity thing, you're going to end up with a lot of men leaning feminine.
Sure. I mean, even myself,
what do they call them? They have names, derogatory names for men like that.
I don't know. When I read the list
boys.
when I read the list of traits they're supposed to be feminine, I have more traits from the feminine side than from the masculine side. But I don't feel feminine. Like, I don't think unless I was feminine. I'm just a guy. I just exist, right? So, Nitty, what's on your mind today? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I mentioned this in the last stream I did, that there is a conspiratorial narrative within these kinds of misogynist, I'll just put it bluntly, ideological circles.
Yep.
So the right weaponizes a term like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to say things like, oh, they're just going to promote people irrespective of merit and just by, what private parts they have and what skin color they have or what descendant or sexual preference they have. And that's bullshit, right? The data doesn't show that in the first place. If anything, it can show the opposite. And two, just think about, a place that you work. Is that happening? Are people just running around saying, you know what? Fuck it. Tina, she's hot today.
Yeah.
CEO. Whoop, let's go. No, nobody's doing that, right? But DE&I is really about giving opportunity and consideration to people and not outcome, right? It's like, okay, well, let's check and make sure we don't have a little bit of a bias here, right? And that we're equally evaluating the credentials of our candidates and our staff. And, it's also about creating a safe space, which I think is like a sign of weakness or something, but it's really not. It's I'm glad O'Flammy is agreeing with me on something. It's like,
he's been nodding in agreement the whole time.
Even it's not just accept people's sexuality and don't say anything about it, which you should do, or you should not be doing. But it would also be a problem if you walked up in your office and you're like, yeah, fuck Christians. I can't stand the Christians. Hey, Tom, you know what? Those Christians are really getting on my nerves. And, Bobby over here is a, ardent evangelical. He's like, dude, this guy is a fucking bigot.
Yeah.
And that's just as much a problem in a DE&I committed organization as anywhere else, right? There's just more active consideration for that, and more highlighting of people that, you know, are unique in the workplace, and that's okay, right? It's, yeah. And then people think that's, you know, reverse racism or something, and it's like,
Yeah.
get over yourself. But that's one aspect. The other is the idea that the government or liberals just want a woman takeover.
Yeah.
It's like, how's that going?
Yep. Yeah.
You think, like, what is this thing that you're worried about that's not happening? If this has been the agenda since the feminist movement or whatever, it's not going so well. Like, yeah, there is like a lot more equity and social mobility for women, but some takeover? Are you kidding me?
Right.
And here's a kicker, right? If women are these fragile, incompetent buffoonery of human beings that can't be trusted with more integral matters, then stop letting them work your daycares at church.
Yeah.
Stop letting them teach your kids. Don't trust them with stay-at-home education. What's wrong with you? I thought they were the buffoons. I thought they were incapable. I thought they're not worthy of positions of leadership and headship. But then you'll just be like, well, I'm going to make sure they get the private education they need. But you don't trust a woman to hold a position of power as like a teacher for that. Why are you doing that in the home?
Right.
It's just as inconsistent. Like, you know, Sunday school, you want to trust a woman to teach Sunday school, or are you going to replace that with all men? Yeah, I'm sure they're going to line up out the fucking church doors to get there, right? No, it's not going to happen, right? Like, if anything, the man takeover, wholesale takeover, is going to be, you know, pretty difficult as well, and that's a good thing. And besides, you know, more than half of the U.S. population is female, so good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I another thing I want to say is that, you know, this whole idea of feminine and masculinity, it's fucking made up. Can we just grow up and be like, this is fucking made up? Can we stop it? Like, my daughter, she's loving building with Legos. She likes math. And, like, you know, a decade and a half ago, 2 decades ago, they'd be like, well, what's she doing, you know, doing all this boy work, you know, enjoying these boy toys and, you know, getting into STEM. I mean, you think she's going to do well with that? It's just, it'll pass. You know, she's going to want to be a nurturing mama, play with her baby dolls and stuff. She does both, but she's been leaning into one more than the other. And my son, like, took care of little stuffed animals for, like, quite a while. He's playing, you know, doctor and playhouse in school with my daughter, right? And I don't sit here and go, oh my God, my children, they're just, their roles are inverting and it's terrible in here. It must be my atheism. It's just, like, no.
Yeah, I had this like all my life. I have been put upon by that masculine bullshit, right? Starting when I have a very early memory. I must have been about 4 or 5 years old, before, I think, judging from where I lived, of trying to. I wanted to buy a cooking set at a hardware store. I wanted my mom and dad to buy this cooking set for me, because to me it was the most exciting thing I'd ever seen. And my dad was freaked out, but my mom made him buy it for me. And it was, and I later, you know, I mean, I later had a chemistry set, which I thought was very much like the cook set. But I mean, I wanted to do all these things, and I just felt put upon by this whole masculine goddamn mold that, you know, they kept trying to put me in. And yet I'm as far to the heterosexual end of the male spectrum as one could possibly be. But I don't associate with all this playing with balls, like throwing balls at each other. Men like to do that. You know, I don't like to do that. I don't know. Nitty, you're muted.
What you're telling me is you love titties as much as nitties.
Yeah. So yeah, something like that. But I mean, you know, this whole role thing has bothered me all of my life. I really felt put upon by it, and I felt like I never quite measured up to that masculine ideal that was being put upon me, and that was part of the contention. Part of the trauma of my childhood was me and my father over that particular situation. He would bitch at me because book learning, you can't learn this from books, and you can't do that from books, and all this bullshit. I once fixed an automatic transmission. I went out and bought a bunch of books. My old man insisted that nobody could ever fix an automatic transmission, so I went out and bought a bunch of books. When my transmission went to hell, my reverse went out on my Power Glide, and I rebuilt my transmission. And then I got in the car, and my dad was watching like, oh, no, there's no way this is going to work. I put it in reverse, and it went in reverse. I put it in drive, and it wouldn't go in drive. And the old man was like, see, I told you. Well, then I rebuilt it the second time, and it worked both ways, motherfucker. And you should have seen the look on his face when I actually fixed an automatic transmission by looking at a book. And so, you know, but all that bullshit was going on in like the 50s and 60s, and probably still today, was trying to put men into a certain category. And I just hated it because, I don't know, I like playing with the girls.
Yeah.
I liked them. I liked them a lot. Too much.
And you know, there is problems that come with people trying to force themselves into these social stereotypical roles. It reminds me of the song "Where Have All the Cowboys Gone" by Paula Cole. So it's written from the perspective of this woman who buys into this idea that that's the way life's supposed to be. So
God damn it.
What?
Now I'm gonna be thinking that I'm in a CVS all day long, because that's like the kind of music that just plays, you know, it's in the background of your life, and you're like, God damn it!
It'll be in your head the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, what am I doing? Buying tampons? Like, what? Damn it, James.
There. So yeah, it's the song about this woman who bought into this idea, and the man too, right? They're trying to play those roles, but it doesn't go very well, right? Because the man is over empowered, the woman is under empowered, and so she's got these ideas about how it's supposed to play out, and it doesn't work that way, and she's quite frustrated with him. Like, we got somebody else coming, captive Dave Dusk. Go ahead.
It's Captive Desk.
Hey, this is where the party's at. I just wanted to say hi to everybody and.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey there. Great to have you here with us today.
Always great to talk with you, James.
Well, thank you for that.
And if you haven't noticed the chat, there's a lot of other people that enjoy hearing from you, and just wanted you to know that.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'd like to hear from you more often in our text stream, too.
That's fair. I don't usually have a whole lot to offer on the technical stuff, but I'm always glad
I feel put upon. But I dipped over to Jim Bob's for about 5 minutes, and he was going on about redheads, and I think he was doing like a comedy bit about redheads. But prior to that, he said women, you know, they like to dress up like men and pretend to be comedians and paramedics and firefighters, and that's what I heard from him. And I almost lost my shit.
Oh my gosh.
But I mean, like, okay, women can't be comedians according to his biblical worldview.
Yes, but to be fair, that's only been ever since a ginger stole his soul.
Yeah.
You know, they could do a charity event, and Jim Bob could get in the cage with one of those lady MMA fighters, and let's see how it goes, right?
Thank you for being here with us, Minnie, and making us a more respectable place by being here with us.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that.
Even spot him weight.
Anyway.
Absolutely. Deconverted Man says Hank looks dope, yo. Yeah, he does. He's pulling it off for sure. I couldn't pull that off, but it looks great on him.
I'm going to try. I'm going to get a yellow shirt. And where can I get that hat?
I got this hat at Hot Topic.
Hot Topic. Oh, shit. We got one at the Mall of America. It's open again. It hasn't been open for a long time, but now it's open again. So. I once bought a vampire.
There, look for a one-piece Monkey D. Luffy hat.
Yeah. I once bought a silk vampire shirt at Hot Topic back in my 40s when I used to dress up like a member of the Insane Clown Posse, a cross between a vampire and one of the Insane Clown Posse, and we used to have parties for teenagers.
I got a Bigfoot Hawaiian shirt. I just haven't had the occasion to wear it yet, so I put it in a nice bag and it's in my closet, staying nice and clean for just the right moment. There's got to be a video.
To have. Where'd you get it?
Oh, I got it online somewhere. I one of the things that comes across Facebook. One of my things, it's always got obviously Bigfoot stuff. So it's like, oh, Bigfoot Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah,
that would be cool.
Oh,
I'll wear it. I'll wear it in a video one of these days when it's appropriate. Sorry, James.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm looking forward to that. So I want to just now remember that I got flirted with today by a very beautiful woman in drive-through line. My son sent me to McDonald's to get him a couple of sandwiches, and I'm like, fine, because he mowed the lawn. I'm like, yeah, it's fine, you earned it, so I'll go get you something. And she sparkled. I mean, she was big into me. And she had to be in her early 30s. Usually I do attract younger ones, 20s and 30s for some reason. But she's about ready to crawl out that window and hop in the van with me. She's just like,
damn.
Yeah. So I'm like, I still got it.
You still got it. You still got it.
Yeah, that ship has so totally sailed with me. It's so totally over.
Oh, I don't think that it has.
No.
Oh my God.
They were trying to tap down the folks in the old folks home because they were getting it on and they were worried about them getting an STD, and it's like, who cares if they get a freaking STD?
Well, they did this experiment where they got octogenarians to do weightlifting in an old folks home, and they said the biggest problem they had is they started sneaking into each other's rooms at night, and they were all concerned about it. But that was a result of just getting physically fit again. That's sort of
yeah.
But I don't know. But
something started coming back to life a little bit. Hey.
More power to them.
Like a necromancy.
That's what I say. It's like, leave them alone. They're in a obviously, you're in your final years or days. You know what I mean? Leave them alone. Give them a beer. Let them get freaky. You know what I mean? Gee whiz.
Both the skin on my face and my balls are headed for my toes. So.
Yeah, that's what Jim Bob told me. But now we have confirmation.
Old balls. Yeah, old balls. Yeah.
Fair.
He's jealous of my voice.
Yeah. Some comedian was saying something about when you lay in a bathtub when you're old, your balls float up to the top and you could set your soap on it.
Oh my God.
I think it keeps growing all your life. I don't know why, but yeah.
Yeah, you can save yourself from drowning too. So use your
they float, right? Flotation device. Oh my God. Well, it ain't quite that bad yet, but
you guys, I swear. Hey there, AR. Great to see you here with us today.
Deconverted man, how's it hanging out? So it's short, shriveled, and always to the left. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you, all of you guys. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for participating in this. I'm really glad we have these discussions. So
yeah. And Hank, I'll try to give you a break, okay?
You don't have to. I actually get stronger because I have stronger opponents to face, like Forrest Belkai himself.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fair.
Okay.
Well, I want you to feel welcome in here.
James, I just want to come on and say, really enjoyed your vlog today, and to keep it up.
Well, thank you. Oh, hey, we got Manny Geisen also here with us today. Says, good stream, James. Thank you, Manny. So I've noticed after I posted my blog this morning, and I didn't even catch the typos till I read them today on stream, but one person, I waited, one person is following my blogs, and I have no idea who it is. But one person follows my blog, and they always read it before I have a chance to refresh. So whoever you are, thank you.
It's probably Steve McRae.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you follow? You mean you can follow your blog? I always get notifications. Yeah,
they must be. They must get notifications in some way because they run it. see, usually with my blogs, I go back and edit them so often. Like throughout the day, I'll go back and add something, change something, fix typos. That every time I do that, refresh how it looks, it counts as a new view, and it makes it to where I have no way to know how many real views I've got. But today I watched. I didn't refresh it or any edit or anything. And then when I came back, there was one view, and I'm like, "Hey, somebody watches. Somebody reads this without me telling them to. I don't know who you are, but thank you." That's awesome. Don't click on this SOS, says Deconverted Man. So, all right, guys. I've got a new pair of headphones today. They're $130. I don't know if that's a lot for headphones or not, but my son has a pair, and they're so comfortable. I've got a big head, and so it's hard to find headphones that I can wear on my head. So they're this Sennheiser. How do you pronounce that? Consumer Audio, the HD 599 open headback, and I just love them. They're so comfortable. It's like I'm not even wearing headphones, and yet they still stay put. And then tomorrow I've got a different device coming that makes them portable. That'll make it to where I can use them around the house without being wired into anything. So that device will be here tomorrow. Because I'm going to start doing professional audio editing because I want to get into voiceover. So I needed a reliable way to hear how I sound in the edits. So
Yeah, it's not really that expensive. I actually had to get AirPods for the road. And these were like $180 because everything else just sounded washed out. But ironically, I found these from Five Below for $8. But it has the same functionality, but the quality is too low for the mic, I think. So I don't use them except for listening.
yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get out of here.
All right. Thanks again for stopping by, everybody that was here today in chat and on the stream. I'm glad we had these discussions. I feel like we've made real progress in just being able to have these discussions with each other, sometimes difficult discussions with people who think and live and love differently than we do. So I expected it would go fine with Hank. He uses language very similar to how I use it, so I'm not really surprised.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times in our community, people hear a certain phrase or a certain word, and it kind of puts us on guard about it because of our experiences with fundamentalists. So, Hank, I hope we made you feel more welcome in this space, and thank you so much for sharing it with us, and thank you for everybody else that was here with us today.
Okay. Later, guys.
Later, guys. Closing it out.
See y'all later.
Bye. Bye.
All right, James.
All right, see ya.
Bye-bye.